welcome to the Prosperous Empath. Kat here. I have so been looking forward to sharing today's episode with you because this is a topic that is so near and dear to my heart and to the heart of my guest today. I'm thrilled to have Kerry Dobson join me on the podcast. Kerry is someone that I was introduced to last year when I launched the show by Jen Corcoran, who's someone I had on the show, one of my first guests. She thought that Kerry would enjoy the podcast, and she did. And Kerry and I have just organically built this lovely relationship over on LinkedIn over the past year. And more recently, I realized just how much I have personally been enjoying Kerry's posts on LinkedIn and engaging in the comments and liking and loving and all the things. And so I pitched Kerry to come on the show to talk about this topic that is so deeply aligned with my own values and beliefs as a coach. So we are going to talk all about the art form and the mastery of creating transformational group containers on today's episode. A little bit more about our guest. So Kerry Dobson is a coach who supports authors, coaches, and other thought leaders in crafting and leading their own group certification programs. After hosting over 100 professional groups in her career in corporate, she has so much insight into what makes a group course or program successful for the leader and the participants via igniting passion and creating long-lasting and impactful connections. Just by listening, you will totally hear the care and expertise that she brings to her work. It is such an impactful conversation. We dive into Kerry's origin story and how she launched into self-employment after being stranded during the pandemic, which so many people did. We talk about the dangers of pedestaling your leaders in group programs and how you can really level set yourself as a leader so people relate to you as an equal, as a human being who they can attain similar results rather than someone who they need to aspire and esteem and endlessly admire, which is something that is really personal to my own journey. We dive into all the nuts and the bolts about how do you create a group container that is truly transformational? How do you set expectations and clarify the purpose and the promise of the program from the very get-go in order to set not only yourself as the facilitator, but also your participants up for success? There's so many more gold nuggets from today's episode that I know that you're really going to enjoy, especially if you are in the process or wanting to launch a group program in the new year. I think you will really enjoy this episode. And it's also a real personal one because when I recorded this episode with Kerry, I was just on the eve of hosting my very first retreat with my Unbounded Mastermind, which is a container that is deeply personal to my heart. And this retreat is something that's been in the works since 2019 when we launched the mastermind, and then it got indefinitely paused due to COVID. So I have been anticipating and looking forward and also a little trepidatious for hosting this retreat, given the closure of my other company hosting transformational retreats. So there was just a lot of significance and intentionality and excitement that I was bringing to my own experience of getting ready to host this retreat. So in the episode, I actually impromptu asked Kerry to support me in really determining what questions I needed to be asking myself in order to host the most powerful and compelling retreat. She was such a gem in supporting me in the moment and really kind of just diving in completely unexpected. And it was really impactful and powerful. And if you are curious to hear how the retreat went, you'll have to come back and listen to next week's episode where I dive into a behind the scenes of how the retreat went. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed interviewing Kerry. Let's jump in. Hello and welcome Welcome to the Prosperous Empath podcast, designed especially for empaths and highly sensitive entrepreneurs just like you who are committed to achieving holistic success. I'm your host, Catherine Wood, Master Certified Coach, author, mastermind leader, and founder of Unbounded Potential, a boutique coaching firm for empathic entrepreneurs. I'm on a mission to bring empathy back into the world of business. Each episode will focus on achieving more by doing less through leveraging empath-friendly leadership practices, boundaries, rituals, and systems, all the while continuing to care deeply about ourselves, others, and the world around us. If you are committed to joyful living and running a conscious business, but amassing wealth while doing so, proving that you can have both in a society that tells you you can't, then you are in the right place. Join me here each week to find out how. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review so you won't miss an episode. Plus, you'll find all the show notes and helpful resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Hey, Kerry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I was thinking about how we connected, and Jen Corcoran was the first one to introduce us.
Yep. I have so many different connections to Jen, right? She's just such a super connector. Like literally that's her tagline, but she lives it.
I think she was our first guest on the podcast, and I think that may be the title of her episode. She's certainly the super connector. Well, I'm thrilled to have you, and by way of kicking us off, I would love to invite you to share your pronouns and then a little bit of your story, and you can start and end wherever you see fit.
Perfect. So Kerry Dobson, and it's she, her. The way that I'll start my story is that, I'm one of those people that feels really lucky that I get to talk about something that's so important to me and that I'm so passionate about. And it's really about groups, and it's about the power that happens and the magic that happens when people come together in order to learn and grow and transform and just connect and celebrate each other. And so that's really all that I'm going to talk about and all that I'm about, because I just find those environments so amazing. And so my kind of way that I came here was I was in learning and development in the corporate world for over 15 years. And I loved what I was doing, right? I was bringing groups together, but it was all very corporate based and, leadership development programs that were amazing, but it was all still kind of within this work container. And I ended up moving from Canada, where I'm located, to the US for my job. And I joke, like, I got on the plane February 3rd, 2020, which, punchline is coming. So by March 13th, I was in lockdown. And by the end of May, I had gotten COVID layoff notice. And it was such a unique experience, first time being laid off, but also I was in a country where I only had the ability to work at that one company in a global pandemic, when there was literally an executive order that said I couldn't transfer my visa anywhere. And I had 60 days to get out of the country. And I know for a fact that if it had happened in any other way, I would have just got another job because I was enjoying what I was doing. But in that 60 days of kind of packing up this newly created life and experience and driving my foster fail cat from the East Coast of the US to like the Midwest of Canada, which was a lot of windshield time, I asked myself for the first time in a really long time, what is it that I want to do? And what I realized is, even though I loved what I was doing and I loved bringing people together and loved leading in the leadership development area, I didn't love who I was doing it for anymore. And what I mean by that is I was working with executives who had great ideas of what they thought their employees needed. But then when you would actually go bring those employees together, turns out maybe it wasn't so accurate. Not everybody wanted to be there. And so it's just a very different vibe, if you will. And so during that windshield time, I kind of thought, well, how do I continue to do what I love to do, but serve people that I really want to serve and work with? And that's where I kind of said, okay, I've got my coaching background. how can I help coaches and how can I help authors to create these group programs where people do come together and they're open to learning and they're open to connecting with other people so that they can kind of truly experience the magic that happens in a group. And so that's what I get to do now.
I mean, I love hearing your story. On the podcast, we talk with so many creators who have transitioned from corporate or the federal government, as I did, into entrepreneurship. And most of those journeys start from a place of burnout or not really loving what they do. And what I'm hearing is that you actually already loved what you do and you made it even better.
Yes. Yeah. And that was such an important part for me in that transition of trying to figure out what I wanted to do, because I mean, not only had I put a lot of time into it and done a lot of education in it, I did love it. And it's just something that, like, when we talk about being in flow state, that's what happens when I think about groups and I'm designing groups. Like, it's even as I say it, it's like full body goosebumps, just that experience. And, trying to figure out, do I do this first or do I do this first? How many people are in the room? How does that impact what we're doing? Or we're online now, so how do we keep that engagement going? It's my flow state.
Mm-hmm. I love that terminology. Like, I often say that when I'm facilitating my mastermind calls, that I feel like a conductor, where I get to conduct the meeting and, speak to this person and this person. Do you see how you do that and how this is reflective of your experience, and like call in people as they see fit. And it just feels, flow state is such a good term for it.
And it's, I love the imagery of a conductor. The one that I've been playing with when I've been talking to people is a guide, right? So there's times where you're a guide and you're at the front of the group and you're telling them and showing them where to go, right? And you're really leading the way. And then as the group connects and as they get more comfortable with each other and with what you're talking about, you're able to kind of go to the back of the group and kind of watch what's happening and just make sure everybody kind of stays where they need to. And then there's these beautiful times where you get to be really in the group. And, anyone looking at the group wouldn't necessarily know that you're the guide of the group because you're immersed in it and you're really part of it. And so it's that same thing of being able to conduct, as you said, those times where you're bringing this person forward and this person forward, and then suddenly they see something that they just never would have seen without that group connection.
Maybe we could jump in there, because I love that metaphor of shifting roles during the kind of the cycles of a group development. And I think that can be really hard to do well. And I'm even thinking about some of the groups that I was a part of in my beginning journey. Like, I had such admiration and reverence for the leaders that I put them on such a high pedestal that I always related to myself as different and less than. And I always I revered them, right? Like, I felt like I needed to build my business exactly the way that they did, talk the way they did, sell the way they did, have the confidence in the way they did. And mind you, they were both two men. With 40 years of experience, and I was so different than them in all the ways. And now in my mastermind, I always try to kind of level myself down and bring my own humanity into the space, like share my own faux pas. Like, I always try to humanize myself because I don't want people pedestaling me as I did my own leaders and coaches and mentors. So how do you, from a group design program, how can you intentionally create a group container to facilitate that experience?
So I think first and foremost, especially when we're talking about like US and Canada, we have to acknowledge the fact that most of us were brought up in a school system where the person leading was given to it, like was shown to be the person with all the answers, the person who marked you and told you if you got to move forward. And so for so many of us, our inclination as we enter these groups is to look to a leader. So you're actually having to work against years and years of that belief that the person at the front of the room, in air quotes, it has all the answers and is there to kind of tell you what to do. And so you want to be really intentional about, how do I start breaking that down so people recognize, hey, this isn't the same. And one of the easiest ways to do that is when you first bring the group together and you do introductions, don't talk first. Don't introduce yourself first. Go last. And it's this subtle way of saying to people, it's not about me. I'm not the most important person, and I'm not going to have all the answers. And so that's such a quick, easy way to model it. And then I also think it's an important conversation to have when you're setting up whether you call them rules of engagement, or, the way we act together, or the we agree to kind of talk about the fact that the role that you're going to play, and how sometimes you're going to be at the front and you're going to be sharing something, and there's tools or tactics or strategies, but that so much of the time in the group is really about reflecting towards each other and mirroring things and celebrating together. And it's not so much, here, let me tell you what to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm. So you work with coaches, consultants, and authors.
Yeah.
So I'm just imagining, when would one of your clients consider a group container, and what should they be thinking about as they want to design a group?
Yeah. So, I joke, but it's serious. So many times the conversations I'm having with people, that desire to have a group is coming from this pressure to believe that they have to have one. So first and foremost, it's like this, who am I to give the permission, but permission to everybody to say, you don't have to have a group program. That's not the only way you can grow your business. That's not the only way you can have impact. What I look for is, have you worked with enough clients that you're really confident in kind of your structure and your strategy and your tools, and they give you kind of this repeated outcome of some sort, right? You can really rely on the tools that you have. Because if you're not at that point, it becomes really challenging to build a group around that. Because the biggest difference between working kind of one-on-one with someone and working in a group is, one-on-one, you can kind of pivot, right? If someone brings something up, you can quickly go down whatever rabbit hole or path that they need to go down at that moment. But when you have a group, one of the things you have to do is, you've promised this whole group that everybody's going to get to what I call the program promise, right? There's going to be experiences and accomplishments that everybody's going to kind of have. And so it's a lot harder to kind of go down those pathways for each person, because you've got this responsibility for the whole group. And so, it's one of the reasons why I encourage people with groups to kind of think about, can I insert some one-on-ones here so that we can still go down some of those random pathways? Because there's such insight that can come from that. But it really is about knowing that I've got this structure, I've got these strategies, I've got these tools that consistently deliver results. And that's when it starts to be like, okay, how can I do this in a group setting? The other thing that happens is people ask for it. So they say, I love working with you, but I'm really missing a community. This would mean so much more to me if I could learn this with other people, or if I could hear what other people are doing, or what do your other clients do? How are they successful with this? And so those kind of questions start to say, okay, maybe it's time to bring some people together in some format.
I had that exact same experience with my long-term coach. I worked with her for 5 years, and actually in the middle, I was like, what do you talk about with your other clients?
Right.
What do they bring to coaching calls as requests? How do you coach them differently than me? What conversations are they having differently than we get to have? Just wanting more, wanting different. And yeah, so that's such a good example.
Yeah. And it speaks to the curiosity that you have, right? And it's also, so much of what we do feels so lonely until we start talking to people, and then we discover there's so much more in common in our human experience than there isn't, right? And so being able to do some of this work in a way that allows us to kind of see, like, I'm not alone. I'm literally not alone, but also, maybe they're a little further ahead than you. So they give you hope, like real hope that it's possible. Or maybe they're a little bit more behind on something. And now suddenly you're able to help someone and realize, I was there 6 months ago, and now I'm helping someone with that.
That's something that I share when we're setting the foundations in all my masterminds, this idea that, we all experience terminal uniqueness. The idea that we think we are the only ones who feel this, that we are the only ones who experience imposter syndrome or doubting our confidence, when in reality, like, it's that self-othering that prevents our growth and our acceptance. And when we can see ourselves reflected in other people's experiences and journey, it creates another entry point to accepting ourselves, our own gaps.
Yes, absolutely. And it takes the bite out of them because you see them in someone else and you're like, that's not as bad as I thought it was for me. Or if sometimes when you see it in somebody in a good way, you're like, oh, like that's a great reframe of that I've been kind of being mean to myself and saying this is a bad thing and only I do it. But look at how it comes out here. Like maybe this is something that's helping me move forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would love to talk about why you love group programs so much. And I think I ask this maybe even selfishly because I want to know your perspective, because that it's something I talk about here on the podcast a lot, the importance of having a values aligned community to support you. And particularly for empaths, because I think empaths, like we self-other ourselves so much. We give to others at the expense of our own success and our own well-being so deeply, so fully, so open-heartedly, that I think we particularly can benefit from being part of a real values-aligned community. So, and I know we share this belief. So, why do you think they're so effective?
So for the empath thing, for me, what comes up with that is, it's the space that I get to receive what I give, right? If I'm in a group with others, I can't always be the one giving. Like it's impossible, but it also is an invitation to not always be the giver and to really practice that receiving and to kind of say like, what can someone else help me with? So for me, there's part of that is to receive what I sometimes am always the giver of. But for me, there's a calling for me in this moment in time, because I think especially post-pandemic, we are all experiencing loneliness. Like the Surgeon General of the US has said, it's like one of the biggest problems right now, this idea of loneliness. And fundamentally, I know we're all connected. I know that's a knowing deep within, but how we live our lives isn't that way. And we are so disconnected. And I think so many people are looking for and hoping for community, but we have all these really clunky ways of having community that aren't really feeling that need. And so for me, that's where the power of groups come in. And so for me, it's a group when it has kind of a start date and an end date. It can go on. You can have another iteration of it, but there's this commitment to this time together. And there's this opening of the group that happens where we really start to connect. And it becomes almost this other entity, this container, if you will, that we get to be part of. And so for me, I think there's such a need and a desire for it right now. And unfortunately, I think we don't have enough examples of where it works really well. So we have a lot of people who are trying it, but it's not filling that need just because it hasn't been set up in a way that will fill that need and will make it safe for people to connect in that way.
Gosh, I feel that so deeply. Like I think the loneliness piece is it's so deeply true, and even for me, like when I launched my mastermind in 2019, I launched it because I couldn't find the community that I felt like I belonged.
Yes.
So I literally created the thing to heal the experience of loneliness that I felt personally. And yeah. And the piece about empaths, like that rings so true for me, like having places to practice receiving
it impacts every aspect of an empath's life, from their marriage to their parenthood to their intimate family and friend relationships. Like, we all need places to practice in a safe container where there is consent and permission to lean in.
Yeah. There's that permission. And then there's this communal kind of agreement, but also this communal commitment to doing it together, right? That I think, especially when it comes to the entrepreneurial world, we're alone in so much of what we do, right? Especially if we're a solopreneur, we're kind of working on our own, that to be able to go into an environment where, yes, we all have our own businesses, but we're also working towards a different way of being together and for showing up for each other. To me, it's so, what I say is, if I make a promise to myself, I will easily break it. If I make a promise to a coach, someone that I'm paying, they can hold me accountable a little bit more, but at the end of the day, I'm paying. So if I show up and have a story, we just kind of keep going. But when I have a responsibility to a group and others are relying on me and expecting me to have it done, I'm not showing up without it done unless something really big happens, but then that's what I need to help processing, right? So the level of commitment that comes with groups without pressure necessarily, like it's not this pressured filled thing. It's this, I want to serve in this community and I hold this community sacred and my responsibility in this community sacred. So I'm going to show up for myself and for them.
Absolutely. I mean, I always joke that whenever I'm in a group fitness class, I work out the hardest because I'm trying to motivate everyone else as much as I'm trying to motivate myself. And I think the same is true in group containers, right? Like when we are leveraging a group in order to make a powerful declaration, and we know that we have 10 voices rather than just one, counting on us, holding us to account, checking in on us, how it's going, like hopping on a call to virtually co-work together, like wanting to celebrate our progress and ground taken. Like there's just so many positive levels of accountability. And I think positive is really important because in my experience as a coach, so many more people are naturally motivated by a stick than by a carrot. And in a group container, it can really kind of rewrite the script on what holds us accountable and really incentivize us and reward us positively in a self-honoring, self-encouraging way versus a self-loathing, self-detrimental way.
Yeah. And I will say that is dependent on how you set the group up, right? Because you can just as easily have a stick-based group where it's competitive and you're, ranking each other. And it's like, so it's about saying, hold on a second, what is it that I want this group to be, and co-creating that together. And I think most people who say they want to be part of a group want that positive piece of it. But if we as the guides are not leading the path of that different way, we can very easily become kind of that stick-based group.
Thanks for naming that, because honestly, I would have never even considered that possibility. And it's absolutely true. Like there are certainly groups that have that energy.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I think that's a really good segue because you've made several references to ways in which we can set a group up well, or ways in which groups kind of suffer or can fall apart. So what are some of the best practices to instill and to avoid?
So first and foremost, the most important piece that you do is deciding who's in your group. And it's, as I often see kind of messaging around groups about scaling your business and making all this money and you don't have to work. And I see it the opposite way. I see the group as even more responsibility because you've got this additional entity. But the first and foremost is having conversations with people to know who's coming into your group, right? To make sure that it's the right fit. And I get it. And I have so much understanding when you're trying to fill a group and you just know you want 10 people, both for the financials, but also for the way that it works better, that number. But if you let in somebody who's not prepared, who's not ready, who isn't interested in that same kind of container, one can make it all go all over the place. So the first and foremost is being really clear in kind of your intake process, the enrollment process, and making sure, hey, it's a right fit. So that first and foremost. The second one is to go really slow when you're building it. What I say is at least 10% of your total program time should be spent in that opening of the group and creating those connections and creating the container and creating the ways in which you all agree to work. It sometimes feels a little slow for people, right? They want to kind of get in and just get going. But the best thing you can do is set such a solid foundation for that group, because then you can go further later on. And then the other important part of that is how you end your group. And the research on it and the area is sacred endings. And it's really about saying, we've put so much into this group, and there's a grieving process that comes with it. And even if we're going to start another group 2 months down the road, there's still a grieving process. There's an ending here. And so being able to give people the opportunity to have conversations and share with each other, this is what happened because of you, or this is how you helped me, or this was the role you played in the group, and ending it in such a way that, yeah, we're still sad that it's over. There's still some grief, but we've also given names to it, and we've given opportunity to celebrate and have that ending kind of actually happen, versus, oh, we've run out of time, that's it, you'll see an email soon. Like, there is this sacredness that's required once you create a container like that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I really hear kind of the call forth around boundaries, having a kind of reverence for the beginning, the middle, and the ending of a group container. And I really love where you started your answer, because you started with the who, like, who do you invite in the room and how do you ensure they're a great fit? And what happens if they're not? Like, that's been a huge learning for me over the years, because I've certainly had people in my group who it just wasn't the right fit for them for some reason. And I actually had to change my contractual terms over the years, because it takes many hands to form a group, and it only takes one bad fit in order to really cause harm in a group and take away that safety, which takes time to build, that safety and that vulnerability and that willingness to be intimate. And not only, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, but not only between the group members, but also with the facilitator, because the facilitator, the mentor, the guide's willingness to be vulnerable and intimate is what models and leads the way for everyone else to lean in as well.
Absolutely, right? If you're up there just pretending away and you're asking people to be vulnerable, it doesn't work, right? So it's that modeling piece, but it's also about, those clear agreements around how are we going to work and what does that look like? And, one of the things people always kind of ask is like, well, what do I do if I've got a problem group member? And I'm like, well, that's something you have to fix, right? And usually it's about getting them out of the group in such a way that they're still okay, but also that the group recognizes that you're dealing with what's going on and you're aware of it. One of the things I say frequently is, like, as a guide, you need clear eyes, you need a full heart. And so the idea here is, and strong arms. So clear eyes is that you know where you're going and you know what that program promise is, but you also have clarity as you're looking around and seeing how people are reacting, interacting, reflecting. So you're always kind of scanning. The full heart is that you are showing up fully, that you are connected to this, you are being vulnerable, you're sharing your experience, but you're showing up fully and you're holding space for that heart for everybody else. And then the strong arms, which I think is the one that is often forgotten, is really about those boundaries and saying, I will hold those boundaries so strong so that you all can be safe in the container.
Hitting pause in this episode for just a moment to tell you about my absolutely favorite way for you to experience a taste of our work with ambitious empathpreneurs in our Unbounded Mastermind, the only community we know of that is exclusively for emerging and established empath entrepreneurs. To get high-level support from me, my co-coach, and our tight-knit community of values-aligned peers to finally step into your quantum next level.
Each month, we host an intimate, non-networking power hour within our mastermind community for you to have a behind-the-scenes experience of what it's actually like to be supported in our community. Join us for our next event, the final one of the year, on Monday, December 11th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time by jumping on over to the show notes for this episode and grabbing your spot at unbounded-potential.com/podcast. So let's talk a little bit about transformation, because I think there's so much possibility for facilitating transformation in a group container. Like, it's really magical. And I'm curious what you've noticed, even kind of going back from your corporate experience to what you're doing now in your own business. Like, what are the ways in which we can open the doors for deeper transformation in our group containers?
So first and foremost, I think you have to be honest about how long it's going to take. And so many times we have people saying, well, I can't commit to 6 months. I can't commit to a year, right? Maybe 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. And I always say, you get to choose either, do you have the resources so that you're kind of saying, hey, this is what we're going to do, or do you have the time frame, right? The expectation. So what it is it's being honest about how long is this really going to take. And transformation takes time, because our brains are literally wired to have us do exactly what we did yesterday and the day before that and the day before that. So transformation requires a change in how we show up and how we do things. So making sure that you're giving enough time for people to actually learn what they need to learn, grow, but then transform. And so for me, it's about the duration of how long you're going to keep them and being honest about what that means and what's needed. But then it's also about kind of saying, this is what's really possible, right? And breaking it up for people. So it's not this big, overwhelming thing that's going to take them 5 years, but instead is something they could accomplish and experience in 6 months or a year.
I really appreciate the setting of expectations and how being really clear about your expectations in a group creates that permission, that willingness to lean in, to trust the process. Something we talk about in the beginning of any of our group containers is just presencing people to the hero or the heroine's journey, and just what that transformational experience is like, and really presencing them to the roller coaster that is transformation, and inviting them to stay on the roller coaster the whole way through, to learn how to find joy along the way and lean into the journey, right? It's like, we all know that if we're suffering our way through a roller coaster ride, taking ourselves way too seriously, like holding in our belly, like we're really gonna have a stomach ache or throw up by the time it's over. Right. Versus like, maybe we just need to throw our hands up and surrender and scream, right? Or lock arms with the person next to us.
Yeah. And just say, we're in it, right? We're in this. One of the things I talk about is understanding the struggle points that people will have, right? And this is where you need to have done a lot of research or worked with a lot of clients. Like, you need to know your stuff to know where are the points where people are going to struggle the most. And then really being strategic about, how do I add additional support, whether that's an activity or partnering up, whatever that is, either just before the struggle point in preparation for it, or as it's happening, or right at the end of it, so that they're getting that extra support. I was trained as an advanced grief recovery specialist, and there's 2 weeks of the program where it's horrible. It sucks, but you need to work through it and come through it. And so that's the week that people are going to cancel. That's the week that people are going to show up. But it's about having that conversation and saying, listen, when you don't want to do the homework and you don't want to work through this, come anyway. Come to the group anyway. We will hold the space for you and we will help you through it.
I love that. Like, it's like anticipating the breakdown points and putting the structures in to meet them there and to make them feel held truly.
truly held, and that it's normal, like normalizing it. Because again, this othering that we do, it's like, well, everybody else is having a good time. No, like, come, let's talk about it. That's why we have an extra session, or that's why we do the one-on-one now, because this is the hard point.
Mm-hmm. So I would love to talk about the quality of a group container and how you can facilitate more intimacy, more kind of really like that locked arms energy. Because I notice, both as a facilitator, leading groups for many, many years now, and also being part of communities, like I was a Peace Corps volunteer. And I always say that, like, my experience of belonging and feeling part of something larger than myself, I've never had a greater model than being a Peace Corps volunteer, because I created just such deep sense of community and lifelong friends. And I think it's really extraordinary. And I think that there is an art in creating that experience of really belonging to a community, belonging to something larger than yourself. And I'm wondering, like, how can we, as container holders and cultivators, how can we set ourselves up for success there?
Yeah. So it goes back again to making sure you've got the right people in the room, right? And that you also have a program promise that you can deliver on, that you're setting people up for success, that you're actually going to do what you say you're going to do. So there's all these expectations. And then it's an invitation, because you cannot force that type of connection. You cannot force that type of belonging. So you want to have those conversations before you let someone in, but then it's about the invitation. And then it's about a slow ramp up to it, right? Like, expecting that the first time everybody gets together, that suddenly everybody's best friends, is unrealistic, right? So it's about saying, okay, where can we take them for that first session? What about the second session? So for example, the first session, we're not going to talk about like the biggest frustration I have, or like my biggest fear, but maybe we're going to talk about what's going on around me. This is silly, but one of my favorite introductions is, what's outside your window? And the idea behind that is, please invite us into your surroundings beyond just this little square that I see you through. And so it's slow, these little invitations to bring your whole self and to just show us who you are. And again, you can't force someone to do it, but it's these invitations. And if you've selected the right people, they're going to grab onto those invitations.
So my version of that question is, what are your favorite pair of shoes, and what do they say about who you are?
Love it, right? Yeah. And it's like, the risk on that is so low, but yet what great information we get from people with those kind of questions, right?
Totally.
And it's really those simple little things. And then it's setting up the expectations and co-creating them. So, you have all this experience in groups. You could go into a group and say, this is what makes a group successful. But then those are your rules, and you're holding them to it. Versus if you invite people in and you say, what do you need in order for this to be what you need it to be? They will tell you. They know. And then you co-create it, and then you get everybody to agree to it. Yeah. And suddenly their voice is already part of this, and they hold each other accountable because it's the rules they've created together.
There's so much more buy-in that way. I completely agree. I think, facilitating transformation, holding groups, like, we all have these experiences that leave a mark, for better and worse. Yeah. And we learn from them. And I'm wondering, like, what's that experience for you? Like, what is the group that you've either curated or trained or belonged to that made the greatest impact, and what did you learn from it?
So I'm going to tell you the one that made the biggest impact, but not in a good way. Because sometimes it is those bad experiences that really light up for us, like, this is somewhere I need to go. So my husband and I were attending a class for potential foster and adoption parents. So heightened group, right? People are coming in, considering this, life choices, huge impact. And so we all kind of come into this room, and it was set up with a half circle, but there was different rows. And it turned out that all of us ended up in the last row, right? Because we were all uncomfortable. And the facilitator came in late, zoomed to the front of the room and said, "Why are you guys sitting at the back? Move forward." And I remember, first of all, just the feeling of vulnerability that I'm already uncomfortable being here. This is already really tender for me. And now you're forcing me to sit in a place that I'm not comfortable. You're forcing me to come front and center. And I remember saying to my husband, and I'd had some training already in this, but I was like, she can't do that. She's risking everything with this move. And I know what she was trying to do. Like, she was trying to make it good for her, because no one wants to talk to people who are at the back of the room. But she also wanted to bring us together. But in that choice, she made it about her, and she made us move, versus all she had to do was move one table and come to us. And it was in that moment that I realized the decisions we make when we're guiding groups completely impact the outcome and the experience that people have.
Gosh, I love that. Something I have practiced over the years is when I notice myself in one of those choice points, I put it on loudspeaker and I let the group choose versus me choose for them.
And that choice is so important, especially when we're dealing with transformation. But I think it's always important. But when you're asking people to transform, you want to give them choice wherever possible. I have a framework that I call Design with Ease, and it's about making sure your program is engaging, actionable, supportive. But the last one is ease. And it's that idea of, how do I make this easy through giving them choices and making things that don't have to be hard easy, right? Because there's some part of this that's going to be hard. And so how can I make it easy for them? By giving them choice, giving them control over whatever it is. And as long as you get them to the program promise, it doesn't matter what your plan was.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm. Well, now you have me super curious. So I'm going to do something I don't think I've ever done before on the podcast. But maybe you could just live workshop with me something.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this weekend, myself and my mastermind partner, we're hosting our first ever retreat for our Unbounded Mastermind.
Yeah.
We were going to host one in 2020 in my parents' bed and breakfast, because my parents owned a B&B for 30 years, and it got indefinitely canceled. So this is our first in-person experience, and we have people coming, alumni from all the years. So there'll be 10 of us in total.
All right.
And most of these people know each other, some extremely well. And I notice I have all of these emotions coming up about hosting this retreat. Like, I have great pride in the relationships that have been cultivated between one another, great pride in the community. And also it feels so like there's such an opportunity here, just such an opportunity to make an impact. And it feels like very, this is going to be a significant defining moment in my business. Like, I know I'm going to be deeply touched by this experience. And so all my empathic tendencies are kind of really front and center for me. So what questions should I be thinking about as I gear up to facilitate a powerful experience?
Well, I'm curious about, when you offered this to them, what was kind of the experience that you were sharing with them, and what might you say is the program promise for this weekend together?
So we feedbacked it and invited them to share what they wanted it to be rather than generate it for them. So I think I did that well based on your responses.
Very much did, yes.
And what they shared was that they wanted opportunity and time to be together, spaciousness to kind of deepen relationship and have fun. And they wanted support around leveling up the next stage in their business.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just want to, first and foremost, that you asked is so beautiful, because I think sometimes we need to tell people where to go, right? Like we need to help them with that clarity. But because you're dealing with people who are already in your program and your alumni, there's already this built-in trust. There's already this level of knowledge that everybody has. So those are those perfect opportunities to say, let's get some feedback and see where they want to go. The thing that I think is so important to pay attention to is that connection request, right? Because you could go into this with all your knowledge and all your abilities and like just bang topics out, do these great activities. But when it's about connection, we actually want to slow it down. We want to give people free time, which I know seems crazy when we think about retreats, but allowing people to fill some space with what they want to do and giving them that choice, especially as empaths, like sometimes we need to just go back to our room or go for a walk, right? And so giving some space where that connection can happen and doing some of it in a really kind of tactical way, if you will, so that everybody does get the opportunity to connect with each other, but then also just trusting in the group to ask for what they need and to connect with who they need to connect with and giving them the space to do that.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad I asked you. And here's why. Like everything you just shared, I was intuitively feeling this real desire to create so much spaciousness in our itinerary, and that being at odds with the part of me that used to have a second business curating international retreats.
Right?
And it's so right. Like sometimes we just need to give people exactly what they asked for and stop making it about ourselves and our need to perform.
The other thing is one of the things I think about is if someone says to me, oh, like I have a new best friend, or I was talking to someone, like that they keep that relationship going. That's the indication that you've got something going with that group when they move the relationships forward without it being kind of forced.
Yes, I could not agree more. Like, absolutely. For me, that is one of my KPIs of an effective mastermind. If I know that lasting relationships are formed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oof. Wow. What a beautiful episode. I guess I just want to open the floor. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you want to talk about or you want to share?
The only thing that I think is still kind of on my heart is just this idea of, there's so much more potential in groups than what we see and what we've probably experienced ourselves. And so really opening up to this idea of you are an expert in helping people to get to where they need to go. And that doesn't change in a group. But what changes is there is this other entity, and there's so much magic and there's so much power and there's so much presence in that other entity that I really encourage people to slow down their process. Usually what happens is we think, I want to have a group, and we start, they're going to do this, 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 this. Slow down and get really clear about what is your program promise. And the way that I love to do this is imagine that it's like the next day after your group's finished and your phone rings out of nowhere and it's a participant and they're telling you this was the best program they've ever been part of. And then you ask them why, and what is the answer that you hear? And that will help you to figure out what's most important with this group. What is that program promise?
What a beautiful practice to leave with. Wow, Kerry, thank you so much. This has been so affirming and permission giving for me. And you've really like shared so many drops, so many pearls for our listeners. So as we wrap, I'd love to invite you to really share what I ask all my guests, which is what has supported you in becoming a prosperous empath?
So it's community, which is not surprising based on what I talk about, but it really is, when I was in corporate, I didn't recognize how much guarding was going on, right, for survival and for success. And as I got into this entrepreneurial world, I started kind of recreating that because it was all that I knew. And it was through my community and through the connections and through the amazing people that I've met that I've really been able to open up and say, no, the whole point of this is to be me in what I'm doing, to bring my passion, to bring my hippiness, to bring my sensitivities into this. And so for me, it's about that connection, that community. Don't do it alone. Don't do anything alone. Find people to help you with it.
Yes, yes, yes. Kerry, thank you so much for today. It's been an absolute joy having you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening today to this episode of the Prosperous Empath podcast with me, Catherine Wood. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review so you don't miss an episode, and so more empaths just like you and me can find the show. As a thank you, each month, one lucky reviewer will receive a 60-minute coaching session with a member of our Unbounded Potential team. You can find all the show notes and bonus resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Thank you so much for listening and locking arms with me to bring empathy and prosperity back into the world of business.